Hey y'all, I'm Bud Elliott, and this is Cover 3 College Football Summer School. We've done our research on the teams, and now we're bringing on the top team experts from the 24/7 Sports Network to help us fill in the blanks. Please follow us on Twitter at Cover 3 Podcast. That's Cover 3 Podcast. And leave us a 5-star review on Apple and Spotify. All right, class is in session. Hey guys, welcome back to the Cover 3 Podcast Bud Elliott Summer School series, and we're pleased to be joined now. Talk a little USC, and who do we go to for that? Well, USCFootball.com's own Ryan Abraham. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Bud, for having me on. Summer school, I love it. Get to learn about everything that's going on around college football.
Yeah, I just like, well, you know what? Everybody's taking a whole bunch of leave, and I don't want to do 2 months of live shows solo. I don't think Fornelli does either. With Dan Cannell doing all the draft stuff. We need to get some content out. This is really fun with all of our experts at 24/7 Sports at our disposal. Won't spend a ton of time on last year's team. Pretty much the worst USC team in my lifetime by all the power ratings. I'm sure yours as well, unless I missed something like the late 80s or early 90s. Maybe there was a worse one back then. But to me, it makes it very difficult to project going forward what you're going to get, because I usually try to start with some kind of basis. Like, all right, their power rating was this last year. They lost this. They lost that. They added this. But emotionally last year, I'm not really sure that team was all in it. And so I'm not really sure you're starting with a solid foundation of power rating that you can just use and manipulate based on returning production and guys lost and transfer portal.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, there's a lot of, the advanced stats out there, and you're looking at the team production. If you're trying to quantify it somehow, it's really difficult because just the team attitude, just having a competent coaching staff in college football is so important. And the upgrade from what Clay Helton was doing to what Lincoln Riley's doing, what we've seen the first, 4 months or so he's been there, it's just really been night and day. And that's hard to kind of wrap your hands around. Like, you can say, oh, you added Caleb Williams or you lost Jackson Dart, all that stuff. You can find, that's fine. You can look at the roster, but how much is every single day when you're in a meeting or watching film, how much has all of that improved the process that you're going through? That's hard to kind of get a feel for. And just, we didn't get to watch all the practices like we normally get to, Bud. We got to see the spring game on Saturday, but the feeling you got was like, oh, what they're doing is making sense. It seems like the players have bought in. There's accountability, there's effort. There's people are actually going around and doing things with a purpose, but that's hard to quantify and say, oh, that's going to make this team so much better. You get the feeling it will, but there's nothing really that you can look down and look on a roster or your star sheet or anything, and stars matter, but it's hard to figure that out from what you go from like Clay Helton to Lincoln Riley.
Absolutely. And obviously like Clay Helton didn't work out there. Lincoln Riley has been extremely successful so far at Oklahoma, according to basically everybody except for maybe Oklahoma fans. maybe a little salty about him trying to, or deciding to take it to the West Coast. And yet, even with Clay Helton there last year, this was still a decent offense. Like that, the offense didn't fall off the cliff quite like they did defensively. My opening question to you here, I'll get to the defense in a minute, Ryan. Caleb Williams, Travis Dye, Austin Jones, Brendan Rice, Mario Williams, Taj Washington, Gary Bryant Jr. That's kind of the skill position crew, right? Like am I missing anybody? That stacks up pretty nicely.
Yeah, I mean, you still got Terrell Bynum that transferred in from Washington. Kyle Ford caught a 48-yard touchdown pass yesterday. He's a former 5-star that you just haven't heard much of. They got some talent, and they're not real deep at the running back spot. All three guys are transfers. But you got Oregon's best running back. You got your good guy from Stanford. Darwin Barlow, I thought, has been really impressive so far. And of course, Caleb Williams is a star in the making. And just watching that first drive from the spring game, and it's a spring game, but they had 6 passes, 6 runs. It was fun to see tackles and guards pulling and running downhill, receivers blocking downfield. It seemed like, again, there was like a purpose to the offense where with Graham Harrell, I mean, it was pretty successful that first year and then it sort of dropped off. It was more just run to grass. It was sort of like just simple concepts. There seems a lot more involved, but when you watch, you're like, okay, I kind of see what they're doing. And then you get a guy like Caleb Williams pulling the trigger. He looked like he had spider sense in the pocket. When everyone was around him, he could just kind of get away and deliver the ball or take off and run if he wanted to. So I think it's going to be the offense wasn't terrible, but I think it's going to be a much improved offense. Again, just looking at it like, hey, Lincoln Riley knows what he's doing. He took the team to the playoffs a few times and, put a couple guys into the Heisman Trophy, competition, winning a couple. And you seem like, okay, I think there's a purpose behind what he's doing. And then you look at the pieces that they put together. A lot of those guys you mentioned are new, but there's some good guys that were there before too. So, and their offensive line is really experienced. The guys that are coming back, they'll probably add a portal guy or two, but they get in Bobby Haskins. We didn't get to see this spring, but I think they're going to be okay on the offensive side and potential to be really, really good. Just knowing that Lincoln Riley is the guy that's making the calls.
Interesting what you went to the offensive line there. So 4 or 5 guys back, a very experienced group that they got some accolades last year. I don't know that they were like, when I watched USC, they didn't pop to me as like a unit that was dominating. But when I looked at the end of the year awards, they had some guys who got recognized on like first and second team all Pac-12. So maybe maybe they're better than I realized they were. Is Haskins, is that lingering effects of the shoulder injury, or does he not enroll till summer?
Yeah, no, he was around. It's just we didn't get to see him. He was out like in his jersey, and I think it's still the shoulder thing that's going on. They don't talk a lot about what the injuries are, but he never took like full contact in practice. But yeah, like a guy like Andrew Voorhees was ranked pretty high in the PFF for guards and stuff. Brett Nealon's 3 years starting at center, and they bring those guys back. And they really had different offensive line coaches like every year, Bud. And last year, though, they brought in Clay McGuire, who was actually an air raid guy. The first time they like meshed an air raid system with an air raid offensive line coach. And I thought it actually worked pretty well. They had a lot of problems like on short yardage situations, 3rd and 1, 4th and 1. And they fixed a lot of that last year. He's now the offensive line coach at Washington State. So I think he actually came in and did a pretty good job. There's a lot of criticism about the offensive line last year, but that's one of the areas that they actually probably played, above their weight class. So I think they're set up okay if the offensive line can be pretty good. And I think they were pretty good last year. If they're just the same, their potential to be better, bringing in Josh Henson from Texas A&M. We'll see. I mean, the whole offense can run if the offensive line is moving. And they got some athletic guys, and you talk to them, they're happy about, hey, we get to pull and run and get out in front of people and block, corners on the edge and things like that. So they seem like they're fired up for this. And just the running plays I saw on Saturday, I was kind of impressed with what they were doing.
It's interesting because Lincoln Riley is an air raid tree guy, but every air raid guy has their own little spin on it, and they do run a lot more of those gap schemes with the pullers and whatnot on the offensive side. If this team needs to drop like 40 a game in Pac-12 play, is it set up to do so?
I think so. I mean, I really feel like they're going to have Travis Dye. He's really happy to be back home in Southern California. Lincoln Riley's typically had 1,000-yard rushers in most of the seasons he's been there. I think he could be that guy. But the other two are capable too. And they bring in Rayleigh Brown, who's a high 4-star, low 5-star guy that can do a lot of stuff. He might play a little more slot. But just with Caleb Williams, pulling the trigger, they got a good group of tight ends that are going to get more involved in some different ways. And they're going to play a lot of wide receivers, and they're Mario Williams. He had 2 touchdown catches on Saturday. I think the connection between Caleb Williams is going to be strong, but I don't think he's going to be like a Drake London where they just throw it to him every time. No. I think they'll spread around a lot. So a guy like Kyle Williams or Taj Washington, the transfer from Memphis, Gary Bryant Jr. There's a lot of guys that have potential to break out. Brendan Rice, I think he's a big back. A big receiver. I think if you want to put up 40 points a game against most of the Pac-12, I think this is an offense that's capable of doing so right away. And if they can do that, try to keep the defense in some of these games. But putting up 40 points in the Pac-12, I think they would win a lot of games if they're able to do that.
And the reason I asked is that defense. I'm very confident Lincoln Riley scoring points. I recognize a lot of the names that got in transfers. Most of these guys are pretty proven in what I think would be like lesser offenses than what USC is going to roll out. But the defense last year was sketchy, to put it charitably, I think. And they're losing some of their more experienced, better guys. I mean, 3 of the top 5, as far as snap count on the defensive line are gone. Mallory and Scott are gone at linebacker. Secondary, the top 4 snap count guys are all gone. They're going to need to drop 40, right?
We'll see. So Alec Grinch comes in. They've added some guys from the portal, like a guy like Shane Lee from Alabama, Romello Height from Auburn. They've looked really good so far. Lee was a freshman All-American a couple of years ago at Alabama. and they already look like the best players on USC's defense. So that's probably not a good sign if you're USC, that guys aren't like huge contributors at these SEC schools come in and they're like, wow, these guys look amazing. That it means more in the SEC, but those guys really did stand out from watching them. And I think those guys like Shane Leach for sure has become a leader there. And, you talk to Grinch, he admitted like even last year, what they did at Oklahoma didn't manage the transfer portal probably as well as they could have, didn't get the effort that they needed to. And guys were sort of like thinking more than they should be playing fast. He wants us to be an effort-based defense where we're just kind of going all out all the time. And I think he knows what he has and the pieces that he's putting together at USC. There's definitely some talent on this defense. And they gave up, I think they were worse than the Pac-12 in like points per game or something last year. I mean, it was really bad. They didn't get production out of the linebacker spot. So we'll see, guys like Lee coming in, height. I think a guy like Corey Foreman, who at the spring game on Saturday, Leonard Williams, a former USC defensive lineman, he's an NFL guy. He was watching. He didn't know his name. He's like, I like number 0. So a guy like that points out number 0 that's Corey Foreman, the former #1 player in the country, who didn't play a senior year in high school because of 2020, and then really didn't do a whole lot last year. They need him to come in and come into his own. So they get a guy like Brandon Peely back on the defensive line, who's like 350 pounds and really quick. I think they can put it together where they can be a pretty good defense. It's hard to get worse than they were last year, but I don't think they're going to be good enough to be able to go like 11-1 and make a run at the college football and playoff. And I think that's going to probably be the limiting factor. But they should be a good enough defense to get through the Pac-12. There'll be some games where I think they give up a bunch. But you will see. I'm kind of optimistic on the defense, which I know some USC fans aren't. They're can be very critical of Alex Grinch. But we'll see. You watch them out there and like, okay, it seems like they know what they're doing. And they'll probably add a few pieces still in the transfer portal in the coming weeks. But I'll be curious to see what they do. That'll definitely be, to me, the factor you got to watch for is what could limit this USC ceiling.
For sure. It sounds like they're relatively happy where they are at linebacker. You just mentioned Foreman and obviously Peely and those dudes. The D-line has some pieces. The secondary, I guess, is maybe the biggest question there.
Yeah, they pretty much 5 starters are gone from last year. They get they love Max Williams. So he's had a couple knee surgeries, local kid out of Sarah High School, kind of undersized, but just goes out there and balls.
He was a dog in camps, man. Like he a high effort right? kid. Yeah. Oh yeah.
He was one of those guys that a lot of the time you don't recruit. Like, he's not big enough, but he really wanted to come to USC. And they're glad they did. You would see him all last year doing rehab. He was one of the more active players. He wasn't even participating. So he'll probably end up being like the starting nickel. But they bring in a couple corners, Mekhi Blackman, Latrell from Oklahoma. He's
McCutcheon from Oklahoma.
McCutcheon, yeah. He's going to move to safety. He actually got a personal foul, targeting penalty in the spring game. They kicked him out of the game. It was just funny. You're like, what? It wasn't even targeting. That's a Pac-12 ref kind of thing going on. Caleb Bullock actually had an interception in the spring game off of Caleb Williams, but they called it back because of a defensive holding call. But he's been a star in the making. Anyone you talk to, he's probably going to be a big contributor. So it's probably going to be but a younger secondary. Bringing in the transfers certainly helps. And they just got a transfer from Ohio State. I'm blanking on his name. Bryson. I can't remember, but one of Ohio State safeties from last year.
Oh, I know you're talking about. Okay.
Ross, I think. Yeah, but I don't know. Just happened yesterday or on Sunday. But so they might add another piece or two in the secondary, but it'll be younger. But I like a lot of the talent they have out there, and getting a guy like Max Williams, who's a high effort guy. Which Grinch wants effort, and he's one of those kind of dudes that could play a big role this year.
No doubt about it. So transfer portal, you said they may add one more in the DB room, probably one more on the offensive line. Anywhere else you think that they'll go transfer portal heavy? I
think they could at this point get another, like a linebacker, a defensive tackle. You might add an offensive tackle and then maybe an interior offensive lineman as well. So it depends on, those are harder to get. The bigger bodies, those goes. It's like real estate; it kind of goes fast as soon as they hit the portal. Like boom, someone snatches them up. And I think Lincoln Riley talks about playing 8 to 10 wide receivers. They only have 10 wide receivers on the roster right now, scholarship wide receivers. So they could add another spot there, even though they've added some already. But the interesting thing is just you've added all these players. And we've seen like Utah last year have a great season. They added a bunch of transfers, but they were it took a while to gel. I'm curious to see this team because it's not like everyone, it's new for everybody. They're all starting at ground zero because it's a whole new coaching staff outside of Dante Williams. So it's sort of like everybody's first day in school. It's not like a bunch of established people that knew what was going on, and you're adding people. You're making an entirely new culture, and it seems to be working so far. But adding that many guys, they've added 13, but and then I guess a 14th this week, and then Lincoln Riley talked about adding like 10 more. That's a whole bunch of new players.
Wow,
that are not just coming from high school; they're coming from other programs. So that's a lot. So we'll see how that all kind of works together, because chemistry, obviously, is an important factor too.
For sure. And I think the important thing when evaluating a team is if the team is counting on all these transfers to work out, it's going to be a bad season, right? If they're playing kind of the numbers game, right? Okay, we're bringing in 17 transfers. We really need about 9 of these guys to be hits. That's doable, right? It's kind of the same thing with recruiting. Like if you're counting on every single kid in your recruiting class to be a hit, that's probably not that realistic. So,
True.
I'm really excited to watch USC this year. I'm going to be focusing on the coverage of USC football and, of course, listening to the Peristyle podcast with Ryan Abraham. Ryan, really appreciate you joining us here on Cover 3 Summer School.
Thanks for having me on, Bud. Look forward to more of these. I love spring. I love learning about other programs, and it's great. So these are cool. You get the in-depth stuff. Utilize the 24/7 Sports Network, because there's a lot of experts around all the different schools.
Absolutely. Take care, buddy.
Thanks.
All right, that's the bell. Cover 3 College Football Summer School is over for today, but don't worry. We'll be back soon with even more episodes filling you in on the top teams in college football. Please give us those 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Follow us on YouTube and on Twitter at Cover 3 Podcast. And we'll see y'all soon.